almost 4+ decades in multiple businesses, working as a CEO, CFO, consultant across the globe. I've realized some truths which I would like to share with you. So today's topic is the business support of today and tomorrow. A deal architect's perspective. The business support model that brought us here may not be the best business support model that takes us forward. For decades, entrepreneurs have surrounded themselves with specialists, consultants, accountants, lawyers, bankers, investment advisors, technology specialists. Each one brings expertise. But today, every entrepreneur faces a very different world. One where capital, technology, markets, geopolitics, and competition are changing simultaneously. And having 10 experts giving you 10 different pieces of advice is no longer enough, because somebody still has to answer the most important question. How do all these pieces come together? That, I believe, is where the business support organization of tomorrow begins. Not simply with consulting, not simply with advisory, but with deal architecture. I'm Raj Sukheja. I've spent over 4 decades in international business across entrepreneurship, consulting, transactions, negotiations, and business development. Today, as CEO of Red Mammoth Ventures LLP, much of what we do revolves around a simple philosophy. Don't just advise the deal, architect it. Change is inevitable. But before we talk about deal architecture, we need to talk about something bigger: change. Markets change, customers change, technology changes, capital changes, competition changes, industries change, and sometimes entire business models disappear. Change is inevitable. The real question is, will we change with it? Over 4 decades in international business, I've watched companies that once appeared invincible become irrelevant. I've seen technologies disappear and entirely new industries emerge. I've seen organizations resist change until change eventually overtook them. But I've also seen companies recognize change early, adapt to it, and become substantially stronger. And that has reinforced something I believe very strongly. Adaptation is the only sustainable growth model. Stagnancy is not. We sometimes confuse stagnancy with stability, but while you're standing still, the world isn't. Your customers are moving, your competitors are moving, technology is moving, capital is moving, opportunity is moving. So if everything around you is advancing, while you remain where you are, you're not really standing still, you're moving backwards. Relative to the world around you, stagnancy is relative decline. Learn, understand, assimilate, evolve. So how do we adapt? I believe there are 4 stages: learn, understand, assimilate, evolve. We must learn because yesterday's knowledge may not solve tomorrow's problems. We must understand because information without understanding is simply noise. We must take new knowledge, new technologies, new financial structures, and new ways of doing business and integrate them into how we actually operate. And finally, we must evolve. Because learning without application creates very little value. Learning must become capability. Capability must become action. Action must create value. And adaptation doesn't mean abandoning everything that worked yesterday. It means taking the wisdom of yesterday, combining it with the realities of today to build the capabilities required for tomorrow. The business problem has changed. Now bring this philosophy into today's business environment. Imagine an Indian company. Its customers could be in the Middle East, its technology could partner in Europe, its investors in Singapore, its suppliers in China, its financing could come from London, and its next acquisition opportunity could be in Dubai. Suddenly one business decision involves strategy, finance, capital, valuation, regulation, technology, negotiation, risk, and execution. And every one of these affects the others. Traditionally, the entrepreneur would speak separately to the accountant, to the lawyer, banker, valuation expert, tax specialist, and perhaps an international advisor. Every one of them may be excellent, but who connects everything? Usually the entrepreneur. And I believe that's the weakness in the traditional model. The entrepreneur's job should be building the enterprise, not becoming the coordinator of 7 different advisors. Businesses increasingly need someone who can look at the entire chessboard. Enter the deal architect. This is where the deal architect comes in. Here's the simplest distinction. A traditional consultant often begins with a problem. A deal architect begins with an outcome. Suppose you tell me, Raj, I want to acquire this company. My first question isn't necessarily how much money do you need. My first question is, why do you want to acquire it? What are you actually buying? Revenue, technology, customers, distribution, market access, intellectual property, talent, or simply speed? Because once we understand the objective, we may discover there are several ways of achieving it. Perhaps we acquire 51%. Perhaps we structure an earn-out. Perhaps the seller retains equity. Perhaps we combine debt and equity. Perhaps the target's cash flows can support part of the acquisition financing. Perhaps we create a joint venture, license the technology, enter a strategic alliance, or perhaps we shouldn't acquire the company at all. That's deal architecture. We are no longer simply asking, how do we execute the transaction? We are asking, what transaction should we actually be executing? And that question can completely change the economics of a deal. Capital is an architecture. The same principle applies to fundraising. Entrepreneurs often tell us we need funding, and my response is, what kind? Because money isn't simply money. There is equity, debt, private credit, structured finance, trade finance, mezzanine capital, strategic investment, acquisition finance, cross-border finance, and hybrid structures. Every form of capital has a cost, but that cost isn't always an interest rate. Equity has dilution. Debt has repayment obligations. Private credit may have covenants. Strategic capital may bring influence. And sometimes the cheapest money today becomes the most expensive money tomorrow. So a deal architect doesn't simply ask, where can we get the money? We ask, what capital structure gives this business the greatest ability to achieve its strategic objective? Red Mammoth Ventures LLP. And this philosophy sits at the heart of what we are building at Red Mammoth Ventures LLP. Our ecosystem works across businesses, growth, strategy, fundraising, and financial structuring, mergers and acquisitions, cross-border transactions, market entry negotiations, and emerging tech. But the individual services aren't the most important part. The connection between them is. Because businesses don't arrive with neatly labeled problems. An entrepreneur usually arrives and says, hey, I want to grow. Our responsibility is to determine what growth actually means for that company. Organic expansion, an acquisition, a new geography, technology, capital, strategic partnerships, restructuring, or a combination of several factors. That's why we believe tomorrow's business support organization must increasingly operate as an integrated ecosystem. AI and the next great adaptation. And now we are witnessing perhaps one of the greatest forces of adaptation in our lifetime, artificial intelligence. AI is going to fundamentally transform professional services. Research that once took days can increasingly happen in minutes. Thousands of companies can be screened, industries mapped, financial scenarios modeled, documents analyzed, markets compared, risks identified, an enormous amount of information can be converted into usable intelligence. So we have a choice. We can fear this change, resist it, ignore it, or learn it, understand it, assimilate it, and use it. That's adaptation. Will AI replace advisors? Some roles will definitely change. Some functions will become automated. Entirely new ones will emerge. But there's one capability technology will find much harder to replace: judgment. Experience plus tech. After more than 4 decades in international finance, I've learned something important. Business doesn't happen entirely inside spreadsheets. A spreadsheet can tell you what a company should be worth. It cannot tell you what the seller will accept. AI can analyze thousands of transactions, but it cannot necessarily read the silence across a negotiating table. A model can calculate risk. Experience can sometimes tell you which risk actually matters. So we shouldn't choose between experience and technology. We need both. We shouldn't throw away decades of accumulated wisdom because new technology has arrived. And we shouldn't reject technology simply because old methods worked. We have to assimilate the two. Technology gives us the intelligence at scale. Experience gives us judgment and context. Combine them with adaptation and execution, and you begin to see the deal architect of tomorrow. The architecture of business. Think about constructing a skyscraper. You have engineers, contractors, electricians, designers, technology specialists, and suppliers. Imagine hiring all of them independently and simply saying, hey, build me something. You would have chaos. There needs to be a blueprint. There needs to be sequencing, coordination, accountability, and somebody has to understand how every component connects to the whole. That person isn't expected to personally lay every brick. Their job is to ensure the entire structure works. Complex business transactions require exactly the same thinking. First, architect the outcome, then assemble the capabilities required to deliver it. Yesterday's advisor said, here's my advice. Today's consultant says, here's my solution. Tomorrow's deal architect must be able to say, here's the outcome, here's the structure, here's the capital, and here are the risks. Here's the execution roadmap. Now let's put the pieces together. The entrepreneur of tomorrow and entrepreneurs themselves must adapt. The successful entrepreneur of tomorrow may not necessarily be the entrepreneur who owns the most. It may be the entrepreneur who can orchestrate the most. You don't necessarily need to own every capability. You need to know how to access capability. You don't necessarily need to own enormous capital. You need to know how to structure capital. You don't need necessarily to know how to build everything yourself. You need to know when to build, buy, partner, acquire, merge, license, collaborate, and sometimes even exit. The competitive advantage of tomorrow may therefore be less about what you own and increasingly about what you can orchestrate. So what does the business support organization of tomorrow look like? Multidisciplinary, technology-enabled, globally connected, capital-aware, adaptive, and relentlessly execution-oriented. Because businesses don't need more disconnected advice. They need people who can see the entire chessboard. Strategy connects with capital, capital connects with transactions, transactions connect with negotiation, negotiation connects with execution. Technology accelerates all of them, and ultimately, everything must connect to one objective: enterprise value. That's the philosophy of building at Red Mammoth Ventures LLP. Not simply consulting, not simply intermediation, not simply advice, but the ability to bring together strategy, capital, transactions, technology, relationships, execution. Because the greatest value isn't necessarily created by possessing all the pieces. It's created by knowing how the pieces fit together. I'm Raj Sukheja, spent over 4 decades in international business. And those decades have taught me that very little in business remains permanent, except perhaps change itself. So we have a choice. We can spend our energy protecting yesterday, or we can architect tomorrow. We have to grow, we have to learn, we have to understand, we have to assimilate, we have to adapt, and we have to evolve. Because stagnancy isn't a growth model. The future won't necessarily belong to those with the most money, or even those with the most information. It will belong to those who can connect. Knowledge with judgment, technology with experience, capital with opportunity, and strategy with execution, and change with adaptation. That is what I believe the business support organization of tomorrow must deliver. That is deal architecture. And that is the journey we are pursuing at Red Mammoth Ventures. Because the future of business isn't simply about finding opportunities, it's about architecting them. If you're an entrepreneur, investor, CXO, or business owner interested in M&A, fundraising, deal architecture, international business, emerging tech, and the strategies behind complex transactions, subscribe to So True Business. I'm Raj Sukheja, CEO of Red Mammoth Ventures. Until next time, keep learning, keep adapting, think bigger, structure smarter, and architect the deal. Thank you. This is Raj Sukheja signing out.